You're listening to the Hockey 411 with your host, Brian Anderson. Welcome to the Hockey 411 podcast. I'm your host, Brian Anderson. Today we have a special treat for you guys. Sportsnet's own Andrew Berkshire is on the line to help give out midterm grades to the Eastern Conference teams. Andrew, thanks for coming on. How are you?
I'm pretty good. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good, and this kind of part of the season is like the dog days of hockey. I mean, you're close to the playoffs, but you're really far away, but I think it's a perfect time to give out midterm grades for at least the Eastern Conference teams. 2 weeks ago, we did Western Conference. Apologize there was no podcast last week. But yeah, if you listen to 2 weeks ago's podcast, episode 30, where we grade the Western Conference teams, you know how this goes, but if you haven't, I'll give you a little bit of a lowdown. First, we're going to go through each division. We're going to talk about each team, talk about them for a couple minutes, give them a grade, and then we're going to keep moving on. Today, I'd like to start off with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Where do I start with this team? This team has been absolutely unreal. They had a great first half of the season. You look at them now, they're starting to get a little bit of the injury bug. You saw Victor Hedman go out 3 to 6 weeks. Andre Palat recently, I believe it was yesterday or Monday, went out with a lower body injury for 6 to 8 weeks. And yeah, I mean, that's a big thing. Even Peter Budaj, their regular backup goalie, is now out. I forget how long it was, but I know he's out for a while. But when you look at this team, it is scary good. That top line of Stammer, Kucherov, and Nemestikov is just scary good. And then they have a goaltending in Vasilevsky. So this team is really, really good in my mind. But I'm giving them an A in this, and I think I'm going to let you kick it off here.
Yeah, obviously, there's nothing lower than an A that you could give the Tampa Bay Lightning this year. I think everybody knew going into the season that they were going to be one of the teams to beat when they had that red-hot last quarter of the season, despite all the injuries that they had. Their job on that top line with Stamkos and Kucherov, just feeding off those two like near generational level players. So the depth they have, and they've still got some weaknesses on defense. I'm not a big fan of Braden Coburn. I really don't like Dan Girardi. And, Sergachev has his foibles in the defensive zone, but he's getting better. He's only 19. Stralman is probably not as good as he was a couple of years ago, but you've still got a decent group of defense that has a lot of offensive capability in there. And, Vasilevsky has seemed to hit his stride. They're an incredible team. They're probably going to be the toughest out in the Eastern Conference this year. The only other team that I could think that might challenge them right now is the Boston Bruins.
Yeah, I think you make some really good points there. And speaking of Sergachev, the fact that they got him for giving up a huge part in a Jonathan Drouin, who's just an offensive dynamo. And I know he struggled in Montreal, but that's for different reasons. But the fact that they can still supplement it with that trade and then go out and get a Sergachev is just huge. I mean, Stevie Y has been unbelievable down there, and he's really created this team that can, like you said, it's going to be a really tough out. And, I think we both given them A's here. I think it's the right grade. We're going to keep moving on here, and we're going to move on to the Boston Bruins, which I'm not going to lie, I'm kind of surprised the start they got off of. Last year losing to Ottawa in the first round, I know they were missing a lot of parts, but you were wondering what kind of Tuukka Rask you were going to get. There's kind of two sides to him. What was Charlie McAvoy going to be? Sometimes you can play really good in juniors and in college, and I know he played a couple games in playoffs, but sometimes that doesn't always translate in the first season. He's played really well. Guys like Marchand have stepped on. Pasternak finally got his contract signed, and he's been playing phenomenal for this group. I mean, even a guy like Ryan Spooner, who I'm really high on this season, who's really had a bounce-back year, when you looked at him towards the end of last year, he couldn't even find himself in the lineup, and now he's playing really good in the offensive zone. He's kind of tweaked it in the defensive zone, but he's still getting a little bit better, and I think one of the biggest changes
where their talent level was, but instead they just infused all this youth this season, and they're trusting all these young kids, and they're so quick and so creative, and they play such a high tempo level of hockey. And then you have that top line that is the best line in hockey by far, in my opinion, of incredible how quickly they've turned this around from a couple years ago. This team looked like they were going to be out of the playoffs for a really long time. They looked like they were, the next Vancouver Canucks with a bunch of aging, really good players, but not good enough to bring them to that next level. So it's a bit of a surprise for me how good Boston has become, simply because I didn't think 2 years ago that they would be able to make this huge change. And all of a sudden, I guess the main takeaway for me from Boston is trust your youth and don't let them toil away in the American Hockey League. Let those guys come up and try to make an impact and have confidence in them, because you've got to give credit to Bruce Cassidy and Sweeney as well for letting those kids earn a spot and, make mistakes and stay in the lineup, because the confidence that they have and the creativity that team has is unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you look at it, like you mentioned a couple of years ago, I thought Don Sweeney was going to get bagged. I was surprised they made the playoffs a little bit. They squeaked in, but it just shows you that kind of mentality going into it and letting these youth really take control. But we're going to move on to Toronto here, where coming into the season, you have high expectations. I mean, you're looking at a team
for the first time in a decade.
Yeah, for the first time in a really, really long time. I can't believe I'm even saying it. You had high expectations, guys like Matthews, Marner, Nylander, Bozak's been good, Riley, Anderson. I mean, I can go on and on here about this team. Lately, of the past month, they've been really floundering. They've kind of hit a wall, I want to say, either on the room or on the ice. I think maybe a little bit both, but you see the reports that Babcock just wants to stay the course and it'll run itself out. And I think this is what happens with younger teams. I don't know. They've kind of hit the wall with growth. Marner's kind of had his sophomore slump season. They lost last night to Colorado, which Colorado's on a whole different level now. I don't know. I mean, I saw an article today. Their fourth line's really starting to, it needs a little bit more work, but I'm giving them a B+ because, yes, I know they have high expectations. Yes, they're in the playoffs, but the past month they've been really, up and down, up and down. So I don't really know what's going on. There's a little bit of controversy, but that's why I'm giving them a B+, just because, I don't know, I feel like they can keep going, but they're hitting a wall for some reason. And I never gave my grade for Boston, which I gave them an A.
Yeah, I would give Toronto a C because, I think, they have a passing grade, but I expected them to be better faster. I don't think they have any legitimate excuses why they are extreme talents, and they need to have more ice time. Like, when you look at Austin Matthews, how much ice time he gets and how much power play time he gets, and compare him to the other players who produce at the same level as him, it's like far less per game what he's actually getting. And I get that they're trying to break him in slowly, but at a certain point you have to recognize that, Austin Matthews is, the next best to Connor McDavid of that age group. So you've got to run him out there and let him shine a little bit and play him in different situations and challenge him instead of trying to hide him. And I feel like Toronto just hasn't admitted that to themselves yet, and they're not going to ascend to that next level until they do. And maybe it's about, his next contract a little bit, but I think that's, fooling yourself if you think you're going to get a deal there because you're not playing him enough. You're probably just going to make him mad and he'll be more of a hardline negotiator. So I would give Toronto just a C.
Anyone who knows me and anyone who has listened to last week or 2 weeks ago, I'm kind of a lighter grader. Looking at that, I believe you gave him a C if I remember correctly. It makes a little bit more sense. I mean, that's why you're the expert coming on here. And that's the point of everything with the disagreements. So, I gave them a B+ just because there's just so much talent there. They are a fun team to watch, but it's just, you want a little bit more. I'm going to keep moving on here. We're going to keep the ball rolling. Next up, I believe I have the Florida Panthers here sitting in, they're sitting in 5th place, but when I did this, I guess they lost the game. So we're going to go with them anyway. The Florida Panthers, here's the thing with them. They have a good core group. And I'm a huge fan of Trocheck, Barkov, Huberdeau, Ekblad. I love that group. It's just that when Luongo gets hurt, you're asking Reimer to do a lot, where he's like a 1B goalie, I'd say. He's not a 1A. Yes, he can get the job done. He's a very good backup. I don't know if he's good with the workload. You've seen his numbers dip a little bit this year. It's just that the consistency with this group, the front management, it's just I didn't expect anything out of this team this year, and I want so much more because they have such young, fun talent to watch. I mean, granted, they've got guys like Tippett and I always pronounce his name wrong, Bjorkstrom on Denver. I probably butchered his name there anyway, but there's just so much talent. I really like this team. They've just done it wrong this year, and I don't know. It's just frustrating because if Barkov and Huberdeau were on different teams, they'd be getting so much more love in this league, but they're not, and I'm giving this Florida team gets frustrating with me because they have the parts, and they're getting like a C plus with me because they had lower expectations, but they just can't seem to get it together.
Yeah, I'm going to give Florida a bit of a harsh grade because they're about where I expected them to be this season, but it's a problem of their own making. If you look at how weak the Atlantic is, there's no reason why the Florida Panthers couldn't have been, one of those top three teams. They should have been able to push Toronto out of that third spot based on how Toronto's performed if they had not screwed up in the offseason, if they had not traded Jason Demers, if they have not got rid of Marchessault in order to get Vegas to take it was a throw-in to get them to take Riley Smith, who also, why would you want to lose Riley Smith? So they basically lost, two first-line players and a second-pairing defenseman for Jamie McGinn, who is not good. He's at best a third-line winger, So I think that everybody praised Dale Talon coming back into the starting or the most important position as a GM in Florida, and it was Dale's team back, and all the number crunching losers were pushed aside, and look what's happened. They're under 500 when they should be much better. They have that great core group, but I think Ekblad is a little bit overrated as a two-way defenseman. I love Barkov. I think he's one of the top 5 centers in the league right now, but he can't do it all on his own. They just decimated their depth, and they didn't have to do it. I know there was budget concerns, but if you're winning, you sell more tickets. So I just feel like this was a huge wasted opportunity in a year that Florida really could have taken advantage and, built something to get the fans in the building. But instead, they've just taken 2 steps back, and that's disappointing. So I gave them a D.
Wow, that you were not kidding there on the harsh grade. You bring up some really good points there on how they shot themselves in the foot. And this goes back to even when they fired Gallant, where, why, and then Tom Rowe comes in and it just really confused me because they had a winning team. They went to the playoffs finally for I don't know how long, and they've set their organization back years. And you said it perfectly, making those trades for a Jamie McGinn who is playing a top 6 role, probably shouldn't be. I mean, you look at where Riley Smith and Marchessault are doing in Vegas. It's just, imagine if Florida had those. This team could be really light years ahead. But they can't seem to get their act together, and it really pains me because I want to see Barkov do that much better because he's such a world class talent. We're gonna move on to the Detroit Red Wings here since they hopped the Florida Panthers, I guess last night, since they beat the Devils 3-0, 3 or 4-0, I believe. Detroit, here's the thing with them. They don't realize that they probably should pull the plug on this group soon. That's my opinion on it, at least. They're not really going anywhere. They have 45 points. They're 12 points out of a playoff spot, at least for that last spot in the Atlantic, which is more likely going to be how anyone in the Atlantic gets in. It's just, when are you going to pull the plug in? I know they just opened a new arena, and I don't know. I also feel like Blashill doesn't get enough out of his group. He kind of they're going around. Yeah, they have some bright spots with Mantha, Athanasiou, Larkin, but you got a lot of older guys, and I'm waiting for Mike Green to get moved. I know he's an all-star this year, but I know there's a lot of teams that would like him on that team, and there could be a goalie being moved because I know there's some teams like the Islanders, for example, probably need some goalie help. I don't know. Detroit, you thought they had a decent year, then I'm just waiting for them to just kick off this rebuild, but not really sure if they're going in that direction.
Yeah, what was your grade for them?
My apologies. I ended up giving them a C.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think I would agree with a C as well for them because I feel like they are what they're expected to be, but at the same time, like you said, they need to admit to themselves what their direction is. They're like, I find Detroit is very much like the or not the Florida Panthers, the Vancouver Canucks, but they have more good young players, right? And some players who are in their prime years, unlike Vancouver, who are quite good, like Tom Tatar and Gustav Nyquist. So they've actually got a pretty decent set of like core forwards plus old man Zetterberg, who is still pretty incredible. But their defense is terrible. Their depth players are not very good, and a lot of overpaid players. Like Detroit has one of the most expensive salaried teams in the league, and they're below 500. So like, if you're grading Ken Holland himself, it's a failing grade, right? Because the way that his salary is doled out and like the structure of the team, clearly he thinks this is like a contender, right? And they're not. But if you look at what they actually have and what their performance level is, it's a C, because this is about what they are. They're on the edge of the playoffs. They're like destined to finish like between 9th and 11th in the conference for the next few years, unless they admit to themselves that they need to go in for the tank. So that's about all there is with the Red Wings. I don't think they have any shot at the playoffs for the next few years.
Yeah, you know what? It's a real issue though if they don't realize it, because if they start to unload these assets and get things in return, they're going to be sitting around like a 9-10 spot for talent in the draft, when you could be, if you were to trade some of these players and get them back and start losing a couple more games, you could be moving up to like a 4 or 5 in the lottery. Hopefully it goes your way, but if you don't realize it, it can really set your team back a couple years. Did you give your grade? I don't know if I heard it.
Yeah, I agreed with you and gave a C.
Perfect, then. So we're the first time we've agreed all day here. Next, good minds think alike. Next up, I'm going to go with Montreal. This is a real head scratcher for me, because you thought they were going to be decent, and then Marc Bergevin kind of lost me in the offseason, where there was a Matt Duchene available and they needed a center, but they did not go out and get one. They decided to go out and got Jonathan Drouin, who is a winger, at least in my view. He's not a center. He's flourishes on the wing. When you look up and down the backbone of this team on the forwards, going out and signing an Alex Hemsky and then a Peter Holland, who's not even on the team anymore, along with having, a Thomas Plekanec, doesn't really assure me like, yes, we're going to go out there and we have a good backbone. We fixed our problems in the offseason. It was just like, I really wanted them to go after Duchene, and it was very confusing. I'm giving them a C-. This team's been tough to watch. Can't really score any goals. That was the issue. Still is the issue. Will be for a little bit. Interesting to see what they're going to do with Carey Price. I know he's got on the extension. I think he'll probably end up staying there. But then again, I thought PK Subban was going to be there. So there's a lot of things in play. I know they went out and they signed a Carl Alsner, which confused me even more. I don't know. I don't really know what direction they're going in. I know they got Claude Julien, who I think is a good coach and right for the job there. It's just, he doesn't have the parts, and it's just, I don't know. Bergevin really confused me on the direction he's gone.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to grade real harsh here because, a large part of my job is covering the Canadiens, so I watch them day in and day out, and they're just terrible. Not just in terms of performance, but in, like, watching quality, watchability. Like, they are just awful to watch. And, if you're going to be bad, at least be entertaining. Be like the Toronto Maple Leafs when they were tanking, where, games were all over the place. They're just boring and unforgivably boring in a market that has prided itself on exciting hockey for 100 years. So I'm giving them a full-on F, because this is supposed to be their prime years for competitiveness, right? You basically, when they traded PK Subban, you're looking at the first 3 years of that Shea Weber deal, especially the first 2 where Carey Price is still cheap, as your years where you have a legitimate chance to make a Stanley Cup run. Because next year, Carey Price makes $4 million more against the cap. You're losing out on, that's essentially another good third line player, right? A $4 million contract. So you're missing out on a good player by giving Carey Price that extra money. It's much harder to win with that bigger contract. So to have this massive failure for this year, which is the last cheap price year, is just brutal. And to have that with $8 million sitting dead on the cap, where you could have had a player brought in or you could have made a trade, and just to have this total paralysis from the general manager as the team flounders and just continually insist that the answer's in the room. I just see this team as the biggest disappointment in the NHL for the last few years. They just don't know what they're doing, and it's so obvious. It's the third year in a row they've had a serious collapse at some point in the season. They recovered from it last year by firing the coach, but there's nothing to do this year. They're not going to fire Claude Julien after just signing him for 5 years. So this is just an unmitigated disaster for me.
Yeah, and knowing that you follow them day in and day out, you probably have a bigger and better feel for them than I do. That's why I only gave them a C- there. But yeah, it's definitely difficult to watch the direction they're going in, and you want them to win, and it's just, I don't know. It's very difficult. I've really scratched my head with Bergevin. I'm surprised he has not been bagged yet. We'll see how he does this, I'd say trade deadline. If he doesn't do anything, I could see him getting bagged easy. We're going to keep moving on here. We're going to move on to the Ottawa Senators, where how have the mighty fallen? You know, you go to the Eastern Conference Finals, you go to overtime and you lose. You're like minutes away from the Stanley Cup Finals, and then now this. Yes, Erik Karlsson was out, but bringing in Matt Duchene looks like a horrible deal now, because now, yes, your pick this year is top 10 protected, but next year you're giving, if you're bad again, you're giving Colorado a top 10 pick, which is not good. And this trade could have set back this organization a couple of years, and now you have the issue of an owner who does not want to pay, and you have guys like Matt Duchene, Erik Karlsson that are coming up on big raises in 2 years. I mean, you have a Bobby Ryan who's sitting there with dead weight on it. Yes, he had a really good playoff, but he hasn't really done anything. He can't stay healthy. It just has not worked out in Ottawa for him ever since he was traded, if I'm honest. You have guys like Mike Hoffman. Yeah, he's got a really manageable contract, down year. It's just a lot going wrong, and nobody believes me, but I really think they miss Mark Mathot in the room and on the ice. And when they let him go scot-free, it was just, I think it was going to really take a toll. And yes, you know you have a Thomas Chabot, and he's young and he's good, but he takes time. Defensemen take a long time to mature. Craig Anderson, not the guy he was. They were playing inspired hockey last year. But I think the biggest key is making the Matt Duchene deal. Getting rid of Turris was a big no. And, you know, the fact that they're missing Mark Mathot, nobody talks about it, but I truly think the fact that he was in the room and he was with Erik Karlsson is a huge factor. And I'm also going to give him a D here.
Yeah, I'm going to also give them a D, but I'm actually being kind of not as harsh on them, because I didn't think that the Ottawa Senators were very good last year anyway. I know they made the conference finals, but you watch those actual games, they were getting their butts handed to them essentially every game, just, you know, barely touching the puck and then scoring on, you know, really chintzy chances, and Craig Anderson was really great. So as soon as it was announced that Erik Karlsson was going to be out for like the entire summer doing rehab and miss the beginning of the season, you kind of think, okay, Karlsson's not going to be peak Karlsson for most of the year, and the Ottawa Senators are due for a big regression anyway, so this is going to be a rough season for them, and it has been. So I kind of expected them to be bad. Maybe not quite this bad, but they're about what I thought they were going to be, so I wouldn't give them like a huge failing grade. And I understand that Duchene hasn't had the greatest start in Ottawa, but his underlying numbers have actually been fantastic. So he's had some bad luck to contend with, and I think there's something to be said for at least trying to make an upgrade, even if you like Kyle Turris a little bit more than Duchene. I think they're pretty close in talent level. I like Duchene a little bit more, but overall, I feel like at least Ottawa tried to fix something, and it didn't work, and it blew up in their faces, but they tried to do something, and there's something to be said for that. Other than that, I just feel like this is not a very good team. They have really good pieces. You know, I really like Mike Hoffman. I love Mark Stone. I think he's one of the best wingers in the game. And obviously Erik Karlsson's there. But, you know, you've got a starting goaltender who's in his mid to late 30s. You've got almost no depth. Your defense outside of Karlsson is one good rookie and a bunch of really bad players, and I guess Freddie Clausen, who can barely stick in the lineup. So there's just not much to like with that Ottawa team.
Yeah, I see the point you're coming from there. Yeah, it's frustrating to watch because it's fun to see Eric Carlson play at such a high tempo. When they're losing games, you don't get to see him a lot. But we're going to move on to the Buffalo. Last team in the Atlantic. Keep forgetting about them because they don't really win a lot. What can we say about Buffalo? It's literally the Jack Eichel show. I mean, Ryan O'Reilly, I thought was going to have a decent year. Not really doing anything this year. Their goaltending, Robin Leonard, just it really scratches my head. Their defense, you wanted them to be upgraded, not really doing anything. They did the overhaul. Granted, it's a new coach, it's a new system. It takes a while to fit in, but if you're Jack Eichel, you really got to be frustrated after signing that contract because this team looks like it's going nowhere, and I'm giving them at least a C-, D+ in that area because you knew they were going to be down there, but they're just brutal to watch.
Yeah, I'm going to be harsh again on Buffalo because at a certain point you got to start digging yourself out of the hole of tanking, and they just haven't been able to do it. This is how many years in a row now that they've been bad? Like there was years where they were bad on purpose, but I think this is year 3 now where they've been trying to be good and they're still just unbelievably awful. And it looked like last year they took a step forward, but the only real step forward that they took was on the power play. They had an incredible, sick power play under Dan Bylsma and under Phil Housley. They've gone from best to basically the worst. And, that is a little bit predictable because Housley ran Nashville Predators power play last year and they were awful. Everything went through the defensemen. So that kind of worked in Nashville simply because they were running, Roman Josi, PK Subban, Ryan Ellis. Rasmus Ristolainen is the only player with a bit of offense on that blue line. I mean, Nathan Beaulieu is okay too, but not running your power play. So they've just got nothing doing there, and they've jumped right back down to when they were trying to be bad. Only 12 wins this year, almost 50 games in. It's brutal. Arizona has caught up to them. How insane is that? Arizona
that's really
didn't
scary.
Win a game in regulation until like game 22 or 23. So this is a huge disaster for Buffalo. It's a big time F.
Yeah, I'm like I said, I'm a little bit more generous there, but you mentioned a really good point where they're trying to be good, but they just can't, and it's just you're digging your eyes out once again. A lot of these Atlantic teams, it's really frustrating to watch these bad teams really put themselves in watching them on the TV. We're going to move over to the Metro Division here, where we're going to start off with the division leaders, the Washington Capitals. As always, really not a bad start for this Caps team, where Ovi, I watched him the other night against the Flyers, just flies back on the back check. He's invested. Guys like Braden Holtby are playing really good. Yes, they lost a part in Marcus Johansson, but they had to let him go. The Kevin Shattenkirk thing didn't really work out. Their defense is not as good as it was last year, at least on paper. But you still have a Backstrom, a Kuzi, an Oshie, a Burakovsky. Now, if you're going to tell me that this Capitals team will be good in a couple years, probably not, because their contracts and their age are going to catch up real quick. If this is going to be the year they win, it's going to be either this year or next year. And I've been saying that for I don't know how long, but they can't get past the second round. And the Pittsburgh Penguins, I'm giving them an A-. I think they've had a decent year. They've lost a couple odd games, but overall, solid performance from this Caps team.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with what the Capitals have been able to put together. They aren't the high-flying Caps that we're used to. Like, there's still Ovi, and like he's doing his thing, and Kuznetsov. But I think losing, I know he's only there for 20-something games, but losing Shattenkirk, losing Justin Williams, and losing Johansson all in one summer, that's like 3 big-time hits offensively that, most teams probably that would take them from being a good team to outside the playoffs. So the fact that they've been able to survive that and maintain, top of the division in a pretty tough division, that's really impressive to me. But I don't think they're in that contender status right now. I think they'd have to add a piece or two in order to get back there. But I give them an A because I think they're just really impressive based on what I expected them to be, which was, more in the wild card or third in their division. But they've been really good.
Yeah, no, they definitely have been, considering the parts you just mentioned, along with some of the ones I mentioned as well. Those are big pieces to a championship-winning team. We're going to move on to New Jersey here as we pick up the pace, I guess. What an interesting start for a New Jersey team. I mean, really, going into the season, they had absolutely no expectations, and now they're sitting nicely in second place where their past 10, they've really struggled with a 2-5-3 record. Now, granted, they traded away an Adam Henrique and got a Sammy Vatanen, which I thought was a pretty fair deal. They needed some support on the back end. Corey Schneider has kind of pulled himself together after a tough season last year. Still has his spots, so we'll see how that goes. Taylor Hall's been absolutely phenomenal. That top line of him, Hischier, and Bratt have been really good. There's been a lot of young guys stepping up on this team, but I think they're coming more down back to earth now. But that first half of the year, I think I'm definitely going to give them an A because they exceeded my expectations, and I was like, wow, this team is a fun team to watch. They have a lot of young talent, and these young guys in the depth roles are stepping up, but it's just a matter of how long they can last, and I think they're starting to hit that wall now.
Yeah, I would say, like, in terms of results, I'd give an A, but overall, I'm going to bump them down to a B just because their underlying numbers have not been very good, and, they've been fun, and I really enjoyed that they went with youth because I think that's the future for New Jersey, and, breaking away from the stereotypical New Jersey defensive-only team was a good idea. I think it's really refreshing, and, I like what the Devils are putting together, but they're not quite there yet, and I think we've seen that in the last couple months now where, it's starting to get tougher for them to grind out wins, and if it's not the Taylor Hall show, then they're not getting much done right now. So I think there's something there with New Jersey a couple years from now or even next year, but they're not there yet. Like, I think they're going to end up falling out of the playoffs this year. I don't think they're going to make it. It's too tight in that division. Like, if you look, there's 3 points between second and second last, right? Like, even Carolina, who's last in that division, is 6 points behind New Jersey, and I think that could be made up in a couple weeks, So it's tough, but only a B for them.
That's a bold prediction there, having them fall out of the playoffs, since they, their hot start could eventually fizzle away there. So, interesting grade. I give them an A because I thought their first half was very phenomenal. The underlying numbers a little bit more than me. I use more of the eye test, but we try to use a little bit of both here on the show. We're going to keep moving into Columbus, where they also, another team that had a really good start. Sergei Bobrovsky just played out of his mind. I mean, some of the saves, a save on a 2-on-0. I mean, my God, are you kidding me? They're kind of coming back down to earth now. They've lost a couple question mark games. I think they've played really well under John Tortorella. I'm very surprised at that, if I'm honest, because when he was originally hired, I was just like, huh? You're giving this guy a chance? But Torts has really matured in his game, and I think he's really adapted to what the game is now. I'm giving them a B+. I think they're giving a B+ around there because they're coming more back down to earth. That hot start in the past month has kind of faded away, and they're becoming more of the team I looked at them. I think Panarin's been very good for them, and this kid Dubois, who people thought that, he's not making the team, he could be a bust, has been, in that second, third line range there, has been playing really good minutes for this team.
Yeah, I'm with you on Columbus. I think there's some good pieces there. Some well done working through, like, constructing that team. I think they're a little bit weak up the middle, but they're getting there. They're becoming a pretty tough team. I agree with you about John Tortorella. I was also like, why on earth would you want this guy? Why would you pay a premium to Vancouver to get him out of that contract for John Tortorella? But he's been pretty good there. They're starting to show a little bit of like some warts offensively. They've been kind of unlucky this year, but I really like Artemi Panarin there. They could probably, they need to get a center somewhere. They're not as desperate as Montreal, but I think they do need a good first line center. Unfortunately, a guy like maybe Ryan Johansson.
Yeah.
But that defense pairing of Seth Jones and Zach Werenski is one of the best in the league. I think Zach Werenski is going to be a Norris contender in very short order. I would probably give them only a C+ because I expected them to be a bit more dominant offensively like they were last year. A bit tougher to play against, but they're kind of slowing down a little bit right now. So it's close, but they're pretty much where I expected in terms of like points per game played. So I wouldn't say that they've overachieved in any way.
Yeah, I think with the Jones issue, you have to give to get, but it certainly worked out for both teams in that deal. I mean, you heard the rumors about with Matt Duchene. That could have been interesting seeing him in a Columbus Blue Jacket. That probably would have solved a lot of problems, at least as they come back down to earth here. They're a fun team to watch as well. They move the puck well. I think Panarin, like we both said, is a really good fit there. They could Probably missed a little bit of Sod in that two-way game there. But Panarin's been, in the shootout. I mean, every highlight reel goal I see, I'm just like, wow, this kid's good. We're going to move on to the Philadelphia Flyers, where if you watched any of the football game this past weekend, it's going to be crazy. And I go to school in Philly, so I'm really interested to see what happens in 2 weeks, just to get a little side note in there. Philadelphia Flyers, here's the deal with them. I want a little bit more out of them. I'm going to give them a B-, C+, just because a 10-game losing streak killed them. I mean, they could be a lot higher in this lineup. People I know aren't really happy with Dave Hackstall. There's some really interesting question marks with this team. Provorov has played out of his mind this year. I think he's been really good. Elliott's been decent. Neuvert's been decent. Their goaltending tandem's been okay. I don't know. I don't really know what to think about this team. Like, they're good, but I don't... If anything, I think they're a first-round out team in the playoffs this year. Just because, they're a fun team to watch, and they have parts. Just they're looking for something else. They need something more, and that 10-game losing streak really showed a lot of character about this team and what they really stand for.
Yeah, they've been so inconsistent. Like, I don't know what is going on in Philly, where they're either losing 10 in a row, or like their last 10 now, they're 8-2. And, there's some brilliant moves that have happened there, like shifting Claude Giroux to the wing this year and putting Sean Couturier on an offensive line was probably the most underrated and best move any coach made in hockey this year. Like, has worked out so brilliantly that they've basically taken the Flyers from what I consider to be an also-ran team that was not going to be a playoff threat into being an actual playoff threat. They're probably going to squeak into the playoffs, either in a wild card spot or, third in that Metropolitan Division, simply because of that move. It gives them so much more it gives them this dominant top line that they haven't had for a really long time. So that's great. And then you have Travis Sanheim getting sent down to the minors earlier this week. So, you've got these great moves and these terrible moves juggling for both, like, for the same team. So, like, it's good that Gostisbehere had this great coming out party of a season, but they've got all these great young defenders in Philly, and it seems like they don't trust all of them, and that is probably a bit of a weakness going forward. Maybe they're just, in a bit of a retool phase where next year they're going to be a much more dangerous team, and it's just this year is, if they make the playoffs, great, and if they don't, well, it wasn't a big deal for them anyway. So, because they've already rejuvenated Claude Giroux, he's not going to decline to a level where he's not going to be a good winger next year. So maybe it's just like they're thinking long term, and we're trying to evaluate short term. But I'd give the Flyers a solid B+.
Yeah, I think that's a decent grade. I've watched them more closely. I do agree on the inconsistency. It's definitely interesting to watch them, just because, Sean Couturier, like you said, I totally forgot about him, but yet he's probably going to be the Selke winner this year. He's a great two-way forward, and he's really, really shown what he can become, considering he's been in the league. He's still a young forward. I don't know how old he is right now, because I don't have it off the top of my head, but he's still, like, when he came into the league originally, he was very young, and he's finally hitting his stride. We're going to move on to the New York Rangers here, where here's the thing with the Rangers. They're like in this la-la land where they can build up or they can break it down. They're on that teeter-totter where they are pretty banged up right now. Chris Kreider's out long-term with blood clot issues. Shattenkirk, torn meniscus, out long-term. And those, when you look at the team collective, those are two big parts. Grabner currently out with the flu, but that's very minor short-term. Yes, Hank has returned to his form. It's just some of the question marks that Alain Vigneault puts out there still haunt Ranger fans, and when I read articles on them, they still question them. It's just there's a lot of bleh with this team. I can't put it into words, because yes, they're good enough to make the playoffs, but they're not good enough to win the cup, and it's a shame because Hank has been so good for this team for so long, and it just doesn't look like they're going to be able to do it. I mean, this division is too tight. They're down two of their major players, the guy they went out and they signed in the off year, and Kevin Shattenkirk, who before he was hurt, they wanted more out of him. I mean, you got to be kidding me. The guy who wanted to come here and just isn't performing. I know I'm probably being a little harsh, But yeah, I want more out of this team. But I'm afraid if it comes down to the deadline, they're listening to offers on McDonough and Zuccarello, and if they trade them, this could be an interesting retool. And if you want to call it a retool or a rebuild, but I'm gonna give them like a B minus C plus just because they're like in that area where you want them to win. They're good enough, but they're not good enough to go past the second round.
Yeah, I agree with your evaluation of the team. That is what they are to me. I think their cup window has kind of like slowly closed over the last 3 years. I think there's something to be said about the Rangers trying to like continue to be competitive for Henrik Lundqvist, but if they were to trade McDonough, I mean, even if they were to trade Zuccarello, like that pretty much slams that cup window closed. Like, maybe they think they could retool, but I don't think they'll be able to retool in time for Lundqvist to be part of that next phase of Rangers competitiveness because, he's getting old. This is the last couple years where you're going to have Henrik Lundqvist as like really, really good game-breaking performance. And even I thought he was done with that last year, to be honest with you. He had a great playoff in the first round, but overall his season was not good. And this year he's just been, Vezina caliber again, which is incredible. But I think that they're still relying far too much on Henrik Lundqvist, especially defensively, just like they're not very good. And, they're not creating enough offense right now to give him much of like a grace period to work with either. So everything's always on Lundqvist all the time. And, I think Alain Vigneault, like all coaches, makes really strange lineup decisions and has his favorite guys that he goes with that are grinder types that nobody likes in the fan base. But he wrings a lot of performance out of a team that on paper just isn't that good. They've got a lot of middle of the lineup guys as their top lineup guys, and they lost Stepan this year, which, I don't think people are talking about enough as like something that hurt the Rangers short term. So the fact that they're even in the hunt is pretty impressive to me. So I would give them like a C plus, B minus, but this is about what I expected them to be. So I'm not, there's nothing spectacular about the Rangers.
Yeah, no, there really isn't. And like you said before, Hank had a regular season last year was pretty bad, and I was also very surprised that he's returned to Henrik Lundqvist form. I mean, I expect nothing less from the guy, considering he's probably going to be a Hall of Famer. It's a shame he's probably going to go in without any cups, because the man definitely deserves one, and his back's probably hurting from carrying his team all these years. But we're going to move on to the Pittsburgh Penguins here, where 2 cups in a row, the first time in, I forget when, I think it was in the 90s, but when you have a team with a Phil Kessel, Evgeny Malkin, Sidney Crosby, you're always going to be deadly. And I'm just mentioning a few here. Yes, they're missing center depth, and Bonino loss was huge. I mean, we thought it was going to be big, but it's really playing out where they've struggled. Matt Murray, I know, is out for personal reasons, but he really hasn't been the Matt Murray that we've come to know in the past 2 playoff seasons. I thought he's really struggled this season. Defensively, I think they're fine. I was surprised at the Hunwick move, but it looks like Sergei Gonchar has really upped his game. Guys like Ian Cole, also on the outside now, which I was kind of surprised they might move him for a center. Biggest loss, I'd say, though, is the fact that Jake Gensel is not producing at the way he was in the playoffs. And I could have probably told you that because, yes, you can play on Sid's line for so long, but, sometimes you hit a wall. And he is a young kid. He's only 23. So he's got a lot of room to grow. This team probably needs a little bit more depth. The Ryan Reeves move, love the guy. I don't know if it was definitely the right move to go out and get the fighter. I don't know. He's definitely protecting Sid, but it's just been disappointing. I wanted a little bit more, and granted, this team has won 2 cups, so their expectations are wherever they want them to be, but they are missing a couple pieces, and Jim Rutherford has his work cut out for him. I'm giving them a B.
Yeah, I feel like there's definitely a factor of fatigue for this Penguins team, because not only did they win 2 cups in a row, which is unbelievable for this era, but Crosby, Malkin, and like their 2 most important players also played in the World Cup, so they've got that added on. That are tough games to play. it's a lot of hockey in two calendar years, and then they're back at it, and everybody wants to beat the Penguins, and they've been super unlucky this year. They're by far the top offensive team in the NHL in terms of scoring chances, high danger scoring chances, pre-shot movement, everything, and they're like 30, 35 goals off the pace of the top scoring team in the NHL. So they deserve to be better off offensively than they actually are. They shouldn't be a minus team in goal differential. That's just crazy. But they've still managed to wring wins out while being like their actual goals are like they're a minus team, but they're above 500. So a lot of those games where they're getting blown out, they've kind of like got blown out a few times and then won a lot of close games. So they found a way to still be competitive. I think they're probably going to have a wicked second half and make the playoffs. I mean, they're only 1 point out essentially, so that's not really a huge prediction. But I just don't think the Penguins are, ready to be on the sidelines yet. I don't know if they'll win another cup because that would be crazy, but I think they're going to be as tough and out as any team in the East outside of, Boston and Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
I would probably give them a C just because their season hasn't gone the way they'd wanted, but that's not saying that they've been bad. It's just the Penguins are supposed to be great, and so far they're only okay.
Yeah. That's a good evaluation there. I think with the Pens too. I think like I said before, I think the Bonino loss was big. I think having that 1-2-3 punch down the middle is very nice. I mean, the HBK line was huge with them. Going to be interesting to see what Rutherford does. I'm going to be shocked if he doesn't make a move. But we're going to move on to the New York Islanders as we almost finish up here. We have two teams left. Biggest thing with the Islanders this year is Barzal and Eberle. And if you look at Edmonton, they just basically handed those two guys on a silver platter to them. Take the pick, first-round pick. They select Barzal. How about you take Jordan Eberle for a Ryan Strome, which is just, it blows my mind. This team, forward-wise, very good defensively. Yes, I know Boychuk and Dahan are out, but their goaltending needs to improve. I have not been impressed with Greiss or Halak. They've both struggled, and they just gave Greiss an extension. They're definitely going to be looking in the market for a goalie. I don't know if they'll pull the trigger, but if this is the year they're going to go all in, they have to. They have the assets to move. They have Calgary's first. They can always trade away. They still retain their own. But this Islanders team, a lot of fun to watch. I mean, who would have thought Anders Lee would have 27 goals by the halfway point? Like, not me at least. They're fun to watch, and it's hysterical to see how Edmonton has given them basically their second line, or at least 2/3 of it. I'm giving them a B+. Their goaltending has been a real issue this year. I know they're not technically in the playoffs this year, but they are fun to watch. I mean, Barzal has been really killing it.
Yeah, they are terrible defensively overall. The goaltending hasn't helped for sure, but I think based simply on entertainment value, I want to give the Islanders an A because they are so much fun to watch, partially because they're so bad defensively and partially because they're so epic offensively. And that Barzal Eberle line, they're running two first scoring lines right now. I watched the game against the Montreal Canadiens I guess it was 2 weeks ago now, where
I'd say about a week ago, I think, yeah.
Yeah, so the John Tavares line was kept to one shot attempt at even strength through 50 minutes of the game, and then he ended up scoring shorthanded and scoring the winner in overtime. And it's like, man, John Tavares, you can do the perfect job defending him all game, but all he needs is that one chance.
Yep.
And to have so many guys on that team that are like that, it's so much fun. So I want to give them an A just because they don't necessarily deserve it, but they're too much fun to not give an A.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens to John Tavares next year. I mean, Montreal, if he hits the open market, I would be shocked if Montreal doesn't pick him up. So we're going to see how that works out. And we have our last team here with the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, going into the season, I think a lot of people wanted Carolina to take the next step. And out of the gate, they've kind of struggled. Darling, yes, with increased workload, has not, at least in my book, not really shown me much. I think Cam Ward at times has outplayed him, the guy who's going to be eventually pushed out there. Bill Peters has turned to Cam Ward recently a little bit more Darling is not the player. Obviously, granted, Chicago's a different story. But defensively, on paper, with this club, they are fun to watch. I mean, granted, when you're looking at a team with Justin Falk, Noah Hannafin, Hayden Fleury, Van Riemsdyk, it's not a bad top four. I mean, Jacob Slavin's really, really good. Their forwards, they could probably use another scorer. I was going to be interested to see if Matt Duchene got their way there or Gabriel Landeskog, but I guess none of them didn't want to move. But I don't know. I think they just had a tough time getting out of the gate. Maybe it's come back to bite him, but I'm expecting a pretty solid second half. I'm expecting Darling to really step up his game. And I think the addition of Justin Williams, having a real true veteran who's won there and who knows the system well, I think is a real big plus there. And plus, I think they're really fun team to watch too. There? Yeah. Oh, did I lose you? No, I'm still here. I guess maybe we'll yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah, I lost you for a second.
All right, I guess we had a little disconnection here. No biggie though, but just to recap there, this Hurricanes team, a lot of talent, a little bit rocky start out of the gate, and I'm expecting a big second half out of them. I'm giving them a B minus around there just because of the way they started off.
Yeah, I really want this Carolina team to be so much better because I think they have the pieces to be a great team. And also I have a personal bias that I know people who work in the organization who I really like, and I want them to have personal success, but they're a bit of a disappointment to me. And part of the problem with that team is, they've got great pieces that between two Finns line with Teravainen, Aho, and Jordan Staal is incredible, but their depth is just not good enough. You can't be rolling out Jay McClement anymore in the NHL. It's just not going to work. They've got to work on that. And I think part of it is just, their prospects are going to come up and take those spots eventually. And, the timeline is still long for this team. They're very young. They've got, their pieces on defense are unbelievably good between Falk and Pesci and Slavin. Like, they're just really good. And Hannafin is the fourth or fifth best defenseman on the team. That's how good they are on the defensive side. So it's a good future in Carolina, but I want them to be better right now. I'm getting impatient. Every year I feel like they're my candidate as a breakout team, and then they haven't been able to put it together. With that said, they're 4 points out of a playoff spot or 3 points out of a playoff spot. So things can change really quickly for Carolina. But they've got to find a way for their depth players to put the puck in the net, and they've got to have their goaltenders make some stops. I know Cam Ward's been a little bit better, but Scott Darling's been a huge disappointment for me. I thought that he was going to be a lot better, but it's just proof positive that just because a goaltender has good numbers as a backup does not mean they can do it as a starter. I'm a big proponent of goaltenders who play more often. Even if they have a slightly lower save percentage, their jobs are much harder. It's harder to be thrown out there every single day, take the attrition of it, and, continue to be consistent as opposed to a backup where you're playing spot duty and your opponents are picked for you, usually the weaker teams. It's so much more difficult to be a starting goaltender. So just picking up guys who have been good backups and expecting them to be starters is not a smart decision. They've got to find a way to figure out an actual starting goalie. And it's tough to predict who's going to be good. Goaltending is very hard to predict, but they've got enough smart people in that organization that they've got to get their goaltending situation figured out before they're actually in their cup window.
Yeah, and it just shows you that how lucky Edmonton got with Cam Talbot. I mean, you could look at Arizona. Antti Raanta had an amazing year last year. What has he done now this year? He's gotten hurt and he's played okay. Same thing with Scott Darling. I know he hasn't gotten hurt, and I mentioned it before. He's just been really disappointing. You want him to be good. His frame suggests everything, how tall he is, and he should be good. He just hasn't come up with the big saves. I mean, I've only watched Carolina a handful of times this year, but when you do, it's just, I don't know. I'm a big fan of Aho, like you said, the Teravainen line there as well. Yeah, they're a very young team. This club is going to be good in the future. I kind of agree with you on that one. A little impatient, but I think Bill Peters is going to have his work cut out for him. He's got to work out the kinks. But that's what happens when you grow a young team like this. There's growing pains, and this is one of those seasons, I guess. we'll see how it turns out for them in the future. I think they should probably add another scorer somewhere. I think Jeff Skinner, the fact that he's been resurgent, he's finally gotten off the injury bug for I don't know how long, has been a huge win for this team. They are a fun team to watch, but just have been disappointing. I think that wraps up our Eastern Conference team grading or midterm grading here. Andrew, I appreciate really taking the time out of your day. I know you're a very busy man and coming on the show, and it means a lot to me, so I thank you.
It's my pleasure, man. I was happy to do it.
Yeah, all right, cool. Hopefully we'll have you on back in the future. If you're not following us on Twitter at thehockey401, go check it out now. If you haven't followed Andrew, go follow him at Andrew Berkshire on Twitter as well. We'll be back hopefully next week. And check out our website and we'll be back soon. Thanks for listening to the Hockey 411. Follow us on Twitter at thehockey 411 or check out our website, thehockey411.com. See you next time.